Conor Benn obliterates Chris Van Heerden in 2 rounds. In the first round, Benn came out quite wild. He wasn't as measured this time out as he was against Chris Algieri. He was fighting a southpaw for the first time. I don't know whether that had anything to do with why he was more wild and less controlled this time than last time. In any event, he was swinging in big shots. He wasn't at all concerned about what was coming back at him. He was bobbing and weaving and doing his usual thing, but he was getting caught here and there. And Van Heerden made it look for a minute or so as though he might be able to fiddle his way through the fight for a few rounds and potentially frustrate Conor Benn. But in the second round, Conor Benn changed the trajectory of his right hand. Rather than throwing it in a looping fashion, he threw it straight, caught Chris Van Heerden, staggered him. Conor Benn followed up, Van Heerden went down, and he didn't get up. That's all she wrote. So on paper, certainly a good win for Conor Benn, good performance, because back in the days, and it really was many years ago now, Chris Van Heerden went like 8 rounds with Errol Spence. He was stopped by Jerome Ennis more recently, but Ennis didn't do it in that fashion, although it was all one-way traffic as well. So Conor Benn can definitely put that feather in his hat and say he did a better job than anybody else against Chris Van Heerden. But judging by Chris Van Heerden's body language after the fight and the way he looked when he was on the canvas, personally, I can't say for certain what's in the man's head, but personally, I don't think he came into this with that much ambition. I know he was talking a lot before the fight, but that's what people do. They talk a lot, right? And he was kind of emotional before the fight. We didn't see that same emotion in the ring after the fight. To me, he looked like a man who half knew he was going to lose. Do you know what I mean? He didn't look like a man that came to fight Conor Benn with supreme confidence and absolutely 100% believed he would win. He looked like a veteran who came in to give it a go, but he found out quite early on that Conor Benn had too much firepower for him. And again, just my view, when he got clipped and Conor Benn followed up and Van Heerden went down, I'm not saying he wasn't hurt. He was hurt. But I think he could have got up. That's my view. You know, it is what it is. You guys, I'm sure, have your own views. But I personally think he could have got up. But he realized that he's just too old and that this young guy is too explosive and powerful and too hungry for him. So why take a beating for several more rounds and maybe get knocked out cold? He's been dropped here. He's thinking, okay, let me just stay down. You know what I mean? I am hurt. I'm not out of it. I could get up, but if I get up in this condition and the fight is allowed to continue, I could really get ironed out. So again, that's just my interpretation of what I saw. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I saw. Now, as far as Conor Benn moving forward, who he fights next, he was interviewed in the ring afterwards. Amir Khan got in the ring to booze, and there was some questions about whether the two of them could fight. Khan didn't seem particularly keen on it. He was just bigging up Conor Benn. Conor Benn was very respectful of Khan as well. Benn and I think Eddie Hearn mentioned certain names like Mikey Garcia, Danny Garcia, Adrian Broner. Maurice Hooker is another one that Eddie Hearn is keen on, although Conor Benn in the post-fight press conference said he's not particularly keen on Maurice Hooker. He thinks that would go the same way as Chris Van Heerden. The other guys, the 2 Garcias and Broner, I think Conor Benn believes will be sterner tests and more interesting fights. The name that has been floated around by many boxing fans, and obviously by his team, not Conor Benn's team, this guy's team, is David Avanesian. And Eddie Hearn said that if they can't get the bigger fights against the likes of Mikey Garcia, Danny Garcia, Broner, etc., then they would look at, that's all he's saying, they would look at the Avanesian fight. Now, Conor Benn has been developed and managed and promoted very well up until this point. And let me explain what I mean by that. Developed as in, he has improved massively, and they've done a very good job. You got to give credit to Tony Sims and that whole training team for bringing him on as a fighter. You got to give credit to the matchmakers and Eddie Hearn for picking the right fights at the right time, stepping him up incrementally along the way. Because you go back and look at that first Peno fight. Do you really think that that guy back then that was struggling against Cedric Peno could have done the stuff that we've seen Conor Benn do in his last 3, 4, 5 fights? He couldn't have done. So he's improved massively, and that is testament to his coaches and also the matchmaking, giving him the right time, the right fights at the right time to allow him to improve and progress. Okay, so they've done a good job developing him. They've also done a good job promoting him, right, in terms of building his name. Obviously, he has the Benn family name. We all know that. But on the world stage, people are now starting to talk about him. Whether he deserves the attention or not, because there's a lot of people out there, he doesn't deserve the attention. He's only getting mentioned because of his dad and he's an Eddie Hearn hype. All these kind of people that say this stuff. Regardless of all that, Hearn is clearly doing a good job getting Conor Benn's name about. He's definitely getting a fan base in the UK. They're starting to sell some decent tickets. And one of the main reason really, why they're doing so well with Conor Benn is not just Eddie. Eddie Hearn's doing a good job promotionally, but in order to promote someone, you need something to actually promote. Whether the guy is a hype job or whether he's the real deal, you want someone who's exciting, ideally. And that's exactly what Conor Benn is. Regardless of how good you think he is exciting. He goes in there throwing bombs and he's explosive and punches with both hands. And he's got that same animalistic look in his eyes as his dad. And in fact, the performance against Van Heerden was very reminiscent of Nigel. Nigel had plenty of them wild performances where he'd come in swinging everything but the kitchen sink at his opponents. So they've done a good job developing him as a fighter. They've done a good job promoting him in terms of getting his name out there. And I sense that the sentiment within the team now is we've done so well up until this point. We literally haven't put a foot wrong with this guy, building him from scratch. Let's not mess it up now. That's the sentiment I get, because Eddie Hearn has put certain fighters in, I guess you could say at the deep end, too early, and they've ended up getting beat. A good example would be Josh Kelly. And when that happens, people blame Eddie Hearn and they say he's stupid. Do you know what I mean? But when he learns from that and doesn't want to make the same mistake twice, they say, oh my God, he's protecting his fighters. This is disgusting. So you literally can't win. Because when you try and put a fighter in there in the deep end, they criticize you when he loses. And then when Anyway, so they're in this kind of no man's land at this stage, not quite knowing what the next step should be for Conor Benn. They're looking at the Mikey Garcias and the Danny Garcias and the Broners, but those guys ain't going to come cheap. Broner obviously demands a lot of money, but even Mikey and Danny Garcia, do you know what I mean? I think out of the three of them, I would imagine that Mikey Garcia would be the most realistic, because he already lost, was it his last fight? Has he fought since he lost his last fight? It was kind of a controversial decision. Was it a French guy he lost to, or an Argentinian guy? Spanish? I can't remember where he was from, but he was some obscure fighter that was supposed to be a comfortable little comeback for Mikey Garcia, and he ended up losing. I think that was on a DAZN card. And Mikey Garcia is kind of in the wilderness at the moment. So I think that might be the most realistic out of the three. Danny Garcia is going to want a lot of money, and Adrian Broner is going to want a lot of money, and I'm not sure either of them will travel. Again, I'm not saying they definitely won't, but I'm not confident that either of them will travel unless you pay them a crazy amount. Now, Kell Brook apparently wants $10 million to fight Conor Benn. I have to imagine Danny Garcia and Broner won't want much less than that. In fact, they might want more. When they're hearing what Kell Brook is asking for, they might say, well, you know what? Give us what Brook was demanding. And if that's the case, if they're demanding a similar amount to Brook, then they might as well just pay Brook the 10 mil. I don't think it's financially viable to pay Brook that much money in terms of paying Brook that and still making a profit off the show, because you're obviously going to have to pay Conor Benn as well a decent purse, right? And if you do that, you may well lose money on the show, or at best break even. But that's called an investment. If you really believe in your guy and you want to raise his profile to the next level and also bring him on against a former world champion and former elite level welterweight, then sometimes you have to bite the bullet and make the investment. So we'll see what happens with that. But they also mentioned Keith Thurman. I think that will be a more difficult fight than Danny Garcia, Mikey Garcia, or Broner. I think that even though Thurman's probably not what he used to be, he isn't quite as diminished as those guys. I do get the feeling that Thurman still has a bit more in him than those guys do. So yeah, that'll be interesting if they could get Keith Thurman. But again, I don't see him coming cheap, although Keith Thurman is kind of a bit of a different type of character, and perhaps he would be more willing to travel overseas and just do different things. I mean, he got a wife from, where's she from, Nepal or something, and he plays the flute, Keith Thurman, the bird whisperer. So he's a different kind of guy who might be inclined to do different kind of things. So perhaps we'll see Keith Thurman over here fighting Conor Benn. I still don't think it's as likely as maybe Mikey Garcia, but perhaps we'll see it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Who would you like to see Conor Benn fight next? The DAZN panel, by the way, it was good to see Carl Froch on DAZN. And I have to shake my head at Tony Bellew, because look, I don't agree with everything that Carl Froch says. Sometimes Carl Froch comes out with stuff that makes me kiss my teeth. You understand? But he is a bit of an edgy character, and I think the zone needs that. So they got Carl Froch on the DAZN panel. And when Amir Khan was mentioned, we know that Carl Froch and Khan have had this long-running spat. Well, not spat, this long-running beef? They've had several spats, long-running beef between each other, if you want to call it that. Carl Froch was trolling Khan and being very condescending towards him, and he did it again here. He said that Amir Khan's only good for getting knocked out. That's what Carl Froch said. And Tony Bellew sat there, closed his eyes, just shook his. He said, "You can't say stuff like that about people." It's like, Tony, it's the fight game. Yeah, it's boxing. I don't like this oversensitive mainstream media British. It's a very British thing in boxing. Well, just in mainstream media in general, but the reason I mention boxing specifically is because boxing is a brutal sport. You know, you got men beating each other half to death, and then you think that it's outrageous for somebody to say, this guy's only good for getting knocked out. That's not outrageous. And it just so happens to be basically true at this point, right? Khan is shot to bits. So I was glad to see Carl Froch on there, keeping it real. And yeah, he would like to see Conor Benn fight Avanesian next, as most people would. And Tony Bellew, after much deliberation, umming and ahhing, and all these long pauses, really weird stuff, he eventually came out and agreed with Carl Froch and said, yeah, he should fight Avanesian next. That's the fight that can test Conor Benn, show where he's actually at, and if he is the real deal. You know, Eddie Hearn used to like to say, still does like to say, that he wants to eventually gamble with a fighter. You can't protect them forever and see whether they can sink or swim. Because if you're going to put all this money into a fighter, you want to actually find out what you have, whether it's worth all this time and effort and investment that you're putting in them. Yeah. So you need to get them out and actually test them to see. And like I said earlier, it's not as if Conor Benn hasn't had tests previous to now. He has, but he's improved so much that level is no longer a test for him. So they're going to have to step him up in accordance to his improvement. And that will be a David Avanesian. Another possibility, if you want to call it that, is that they take Conor Benn over to the United States and put him in the gym with an Errol Spence, a Terence Crawford, a Ugas. I would like to see him do that because they're not willing to step up to that level right now. You don't hear Eddie Hearn or any of them saying that, yeah, we're ready for Crawford and Spence, and they're not saying any of that. So I would like to see them take him over to America, have him spar Crawford, have him spar Errol Spence, Ugas, these guys, and just see where he's at in the gym. And if he's able to hold his own, and I'm saying it's a big if he's able to hold his own with those guys, maybe that then gives them the confidence to come back to the UK and say, okay, we'll put him in with Avanesian. We saw what we needed to see in there in sparring against Spence. You know, these guys weren't holding back, and Conor held his own. So yeah, let's stick him in with Avanesian now. That would be a good way to, again, gauge his progression and see whether it's actually worth putting him in with an Avanesian, whether that's not too much of a risk in terms of the whole risk-reward factor, right? Because Eddie Hearn's now talking about how Avanesian don't sell any tickets and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I think the reality is Eddie Hearn had nightmares after the Josh Kelly because Eddie Hearn was grooming Josh Kelly to be a British star. That's what he was doing. And Josh Kelly got ultimately stopped by Avanesian, and he doesn't want that feeling again. You know what I mean? He don't want that feeling again. And he's probably thinking to himself, I would be stupid to make the same mistake with Conor Benn that I made with Josh Kelly. In fact, Josh Kelly would be a good shout for Conor Benn. Josh Kelly's actually said, I think fairly recently, that he'd still be interested in a Conor Benn fight. And at the time when they first started talking about Josh Kelly against Conor Benn, Kelly, at least to me, seemed a far more advanced fighter. That was back when Benn was getting dropped and going life and death with Cedric Payno. He's come on leaps and bounds since then. So yeah, if they can get a Josh Kelly fight together, but obviously Kelly's with a different promoter now and on a different network, so I don't know how feasible it is. But if they can do it, I think that would be a good one for Conor Benn because he'd be in there with an athletic guy, a guy who still relatively young. He's only lost the one fight, hasn't taken loads of punishment. It's not a Chris Van Heerden, do you know what I mean? And it's a UK fight that's, I guess, been built, not necessarily been building, but they have had some sort of rivalry for several years. So that could easily pack out an arena in the UK. Surely that would be a great fight for the zone. Filling out an arena, Conor Benn versus Josh Kelly. Yeah, make that happen and then see where you go from there. But if it was up to me, I would say take Conor Benn to the States, try to get him in a Crawford camp, try to get him in an Errol Spence camp, try to get him in a UGAS camp, see how he spars, and then say, okay, never mind fighting any more people right at the end of their career. Let's put him in with somebody live. Let's put him in with an Avanesian or somebody the equivalent who's got ambition, who's strong, who's dangerous, who could actually take him the rounds, hit him back, you know what I mean? Take him into deep waters. And if he comes through that, then I guess we have to put him in with Spence and Ugas and Terence Crawford and so on. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below about Conor Benn's performance, who he should fight next, what you think about the stuff Eddie Hearn is saying, the Avanesian fight, the other fights I mentioned. Let me know in the comments, people. If you're tired of the biased narratives and mass censorship on mainstream platforms, and you want to be part of a community of critical thinkers who love free speech just as much as you do, then come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide variety of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&As, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high-quality MP3. We've also got an Element group where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. Unlike Discord, it has full end-to-end encryption, is decentralized, and it's 100% censorship-free. You can also send voice notes as well as much larger audio and video files than you can on Discord. So come and sign up on Patreon. There's no contract, there's no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a cup of coffee. So I'll see you over there. I'm out.